All right, everyone, get ready because today we're going deep into a major turning point in history, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire.
A pivotal moment indeed.
We've got some really interesting excerpts from a document about Hernán Cortés, the conquistador who led the whole thing.
Cortés, a truly fascinating figure.
He really is. And our goal today is to dig into the nuances of what happened. We want to move past this simple good guys versus bad guys kind of story.
It's rarely that straightforward, is it?
Never is. We'll start by exploring the Aztecs before the Spanish even got there, looking at their accomplishments, but also some of their practices that, might seem pretty shocking to us today.
Yes, certain aspects of their culture can be quite jarring from a modern perspective.
Definitely. And we'll examine what happened after the conquest, the good and the bad, to see how this clash of cultures shaped Mexico into what we know today.
A story of both triumph and tragedy, wouldn't you say?
For sure. So, to kick things off, it's important to understand that the Aztecs weren't just one big unified group.
Absolutely. They were an empire that ruled over many different groups, and not all of them were happy about being under Aztec control. It was a complex web of alliances and resentments, you could say, ripe for someone like Cortés to exploit.
So before we get to the Spanish arrival, can you paint us a picture of the Aztecs? What made them so impressive?
Well, they were incredibly advanced for their time. I mean, think about it. They had mastered astronomy, engineering, and agriculture. They developed these sophisticated systems of writing and mathematics.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really is. And their cities, especially their capital, Tenochtitlan, were architectural marvels. Picture this: a city built on a lake with causeways and canals connecting these grand temples and palaces. It was a truly breathtaking sight.
It sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But alongside these advancements, there's this practice of human sacrifice, which, is really hard for us to grasp today.
Yes, that's true. Human sacrifice was a central part of their religious beliefs. They believed it was necessary to appease the gods and ensure the world's continued existence. It was a way to maintain balance in their view.
I see. So it's a stark reminder that different cultures have different moral compasses, right? One's shaped by their own unique worldviews.
Precisely. It's a challenge to look back at history through a modern lens and try to understand practices that seem so foreign to us.
Definitely. So into this complex society walks Hernán Cortés in 1519, right? With this small force of Spanish conquistadors armed with weapons that the Aztecs had never seen before. What exactly was Cortés hoping to achieve?
Well, initially his goals were exploration and expansion, typical conquistador stuff. He wanted to claim new lands for the Spanish crown, find gold and riches, all that. But his ambition, let's just say it grew pretty quickly, fueled by opportunity and, a fair bit of ruthlessness.
I can only imagine. And this is where Malintzin, also known as La Malinche, comes into the story, right? An indigenous woman who became Cortés's interpreter and advisor. She played a really key role, didn't she?
Oh, absolutely. Melanchthon's knowledge of local languages and politics was essential for Cortés. She helped him navigate that complex world of alliances and rivalries, allowing him to, kind of exploit those divisions to his advantage. You could think of her as the ultimate cultural bridge.
Wow, fascinating. So she facilitated communication and understanding, but at the same time, enabled the very conquest she was a part of.
A complex and somewhat tragic figure, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And Cortés, he was a master strategist, wasn't he? Forming alliances with groups who resented Aztec rule, like the Tlaxcalans. That was a major factor in his eventual victory.
Oh, without a doubt. He recognized that simmering discontent and used it brilliantly to his advantage. And this really tells us a lot about the internal dynamics of the Aztec Empire, how Cortés, with a relatively small force, was able to tip the scales.
It's amazing how a few well-placed alliances can completely change the course of history.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of impressive cities, Cortés's arrival in Tenochtitlan must have been quite a spectacle.
I bet it was. How did the Aztecs react to these newcomers? What did they make of them?
Well, the Aztec emperor, Moctezuma II, was in a tough spot. There are these prophecies about the return of gods from the east, and some scholars believe this really influenced his initial response to Cortés.
Oh, interesting. So was Cortés seen as a god or a threat?
Right.
Or something in between?
It's hard to say for sure, but the situation was definitely full of uncertainty and misinterpretations. Imagine encountering people with technology and weapons you've never seen before who claim to come from a distant land.
It must have been mind-blowing for them. So did Cortés just walk right into Tenochtitlan and take over?
Not exactly. It was a bit more complicated than that. He took a big gamble by taking Moctezuma hostage, effectively gaining control of the city from the inside.
Wow, that's bold.
It was a risky move, though. The Aztecs, sensing weakness, revolted in 1520, forcing the Spanish to flee during what's known as La Noche Triste, or the Night of Sorrows.
That sounds intense.
It was a brutal and bloody event. Cortés and his men barely escaped with their lives. It was a major setback, a reminder that the conquest was far from a sure thing.
So what happened next?
Well, Cortés was nothing if not persistent. He regrouped, strengthened his alliances, and returned a year later to lay siege to the city.
And this siege, if I'm not mistaken, was the final chapter in the fall of Tenochtitlan.
Indeed. It was a long and brutal affair with heavy losses on both sides, but disease played a decisive role. Smallpox, brought by the Europeans, ravaged the Aztec population. The city, weakened and demoralized, finally fell to the Spanish in 1521.
The end of an era. The fall of an empire.
A truly pivotal moment in history. But it wasn't just about brute force either. Remember how I mentioned those creatures?
Yeah, the ones the Aztecs had never seen before?
Horses, that's right.
Ah, of course.
The Spanish had horses, and they also brought cannons and armor. All this technology the Aztecs had never encountered.
It's hard to imagine the shock of seeing a horse for the very first time, let alone having to face one in battle, or the sheer power of those cannons.
Exactly. This technological gap played a huge role in the Spanish victory. But it wasn't the only factor, right? We can't forget the element of, well, I guess you could call it luck. Or maybe timing is a better word. Cortés just happened to arrive at a moment when the Aztec Empire was already dealing with all sorts of internal divisions and unrest.
So he was lucky enough to show up at a point of weakness and then expertly exploited those existing tensions. What a twist of fate.
That's a great way to put it. He used those simmering resentments to forge alliances, basically turning the Aztecs' own subjects against them. It's a classic example of a smaller force using strategy and circumstance to overcome a much larger one. So with Tenochtitlan fallen and New Spain established, the whole landscape of Mexico is forever changed. What were some of the biggest long-term consequences in all this?
Well, I can only imagine the impact was enormous.
It really was. One of the most profound changes was the arrival of Christianity. Indigenous religions, which had been so central to Aztec life, were suddenly suppressed and replaced by churches and monasteries. A massive cultural and spiritual upheaval, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Their whole belief system was completely reshaped. And didn't the Spanish also bring new social and political structures with them?
Of course, they imposed their own systems of governance, their laws, their social hierarchy. This led to the rise of a whole new colonial elite, often made up of people with both Spanish and indigenous ancestry. Just imagine a completely new social order springing up from the ruins of the old one.
It's mind-blowing to think about the scale of the change that took place during this period, how everything was just totally upended.
And then there were the economic transformations. The Spanish brought new agricultural practices, new crops, and livestock. Mining became this massive industry, extracting huge amounts of wealth from the land. All of this had a profound impact on the native population, and in many cases, a devastating one.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge the suffering that the indigenous people went through during this period. The forced labor, the exposure to new diseases, the loss of their traditional ways of life.
Absolutely. It's a crucial part of the story. Their voices and experiences need to be heard and remembered. And as we go deeper into this history, it's essential to consider the perspectives of everyone involved, both the conquerors and the conquered. It's not a simple story.
Definitely not. You mentioned livestock earlier. What specific changes did their introduction bring about?
Well, think about it. Cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, all these animals were totally new to the Americas. Their arrival transformed the landscape and the economy.
Yeah, horses especially must have revolutionized both transportation and warfare.
Oh, without a doubt. But the introduction of livestock also had some unintended consequences, right? For example, large herds grazing on the land led to deforestation and soil erosion. It's a good illustration of how even changes that seem positive on the surface can have unforeseen negative effects. And understanding this complex interplay between human actions and the environment is crucial for grasping the long-term consequences of events like the conquest.
So the legacy of the conquest isn't just black and white. It's this complex tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, of cultures blending together, of ecological transformations. And all of this continues to shape Mexico today.
That's exactly right. It's a multifaceted legacy that we need to examine with nuance, with a willingness to acknowledge both the positive and the negative aspects. And as we move forward in our exploration, we'll see how this legacy has continued to unfold, how it's influenced Mexico's culture, its social and economic structures, its very identity.
This has been fascinating. We've covered so much ground already, from the incredible achievements of the Aztecs to all the intricacies of the Spanish conquest and its lasting effects. It's amazing to see how it all fits together. But there's still so much more to uncover. What other insights can we gain from this pivotal moment in history? You know, it's interesting. We've been talking about the impact of the conquest, and it got me thinking about something you mentioned earlier about the Spanish actually making efforts to protect the indigenous people. Seems kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Especially considering all the violence and exploitation that was happening.
It definitely is a fascinating and a complex aspect of this whole story.
So tell me more about that. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, you have to remember that Spain saw itself as a defender of Catholicism,
Right.
and that included, a sense of responsibility for the souls of the indigenous people.
I see.
They believed it was their duty to convert them to Christianity and to protect them from exploitation, at least in theory.
So how did that translate into actual policies? Did they actually do anything concrete?
Yeah, they did. The Spanish crown enacted laws known as the Laws of the Indies.
Okay.
And these laws were specifically designed to regulate the treatment of indigenous people. They prohibited enslavement, for example, and they granted them certain rights to land and property. There was even a system of courts set up to address their grievances.
Wow, that's pretty surprising. It sounds actually quite progressive for that time period.
It does, doesn't it? At least on paper, it was a pretty forward-thinking approach. But the reality on the ground, as you might imagine, was often much harsher.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The colonists, eager for profit and power, they often just ignored or completely violated these laws.
So the classic story of good intentions clashing with the realities of colonial life. That's a shame.
It is. It's a recurring theme throughout history, and it's definitely relevant here. The Crown's attempts to create a more humane system were often just undermined by the people who were actually there living and working in the colonies.
It sounds like there was this constant tension, this battle between the ideals of the Spanish crown and the greed of the conquistadors and colonists.
Yeah, you could say that.
So were the indigenous people just completely passive in all of this? Or did they resist in any way?
Oh, they absolutely resisted. They weren't just sitting back and letting all of this happen. They adapted, they fought back, and they found ways to preserve their culture and traditions despite the enormous pressure they were under. Their resilience is truly remarkable.
It's inspiring to hear about their strength in the face of such adversity. Did any of their cultural heritage actually survive?
Oh, it absolutely did. Indigenous culture wasn't wiped out, it was transformed. It blended with Spanish influences, creating something new and unique.
It's kind of a fusion, a mix of the two.
Exactly. And you can still see it today in Mexico's vibrant art and music, its delicious cuisine, its rich traditions. All of these things are a testament to the enduring legacy of indigenous culture.
It's amazing that so much of that heritage managed to survive despite centuries of change.
It really speaks to the power of culture. It evolves, it adapts, but it has this remarkable ability to persist. And the story of Mexico really embodies that resilience.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. The Spanish conquest wasn't just some simple event. It was a brutal and violent period with devastating consequences for the indigenous population. But it also led to cultural exchange, to the creation of a new and vibrant society, and to a legacy that continues to shape Mexico today.
It's a story full of contradictions, isn't it?
It really is. And it's a story that forces us to ask some tough questions about power, about culture, about the lasting legacies of colonialism. It's a history that still resonates today, as Mexico continues to grapple with its own identity and its place in the world.
It's a reminder that the past is never truly past. It shapes who we are and the world we live in ways we may not always realize.
Well said. We started with the advancements of the Aztecs, explored the complexities of the Spanish conquest, and examined its enduring impact on Mexico. It's been a thought-provoking journey through a pivotal moment in history.
A journey that challenges us to think critically about the forces that have shaped our world, and a journey that hopefully inspires us to learn more, to keep asking questions, and to engage in meaningful dialogue about the past and its relevance to the present.
Absolutely. So we'll leave you with this thought. Imagine yourself back in the 16th century witnessing this incredible clash of worlds firsthand. How would you have reacted? What choices would you have made? It's a question that encourages us to step into the shoes of those who lived through these events, to grapple with the complexities of history, and to recognize the human stories at its heart. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.